Hi viewers. So in this video, I'm going to talk about Apache CXF, which is a framework for web service development. And in this video, we're just going to look at a very high level overview of the CXF framework. And in subsequent videos, we will look at how to develop web services and web clients using CXF. So, before we get into understanding what CXF offers, so let's try to understand what is a web service. So, W3C defines a web service as a software system designed to support interoperable machine-to-machine interaction over a network. So I'm just reading through whatever is on the slide, as you can see, and it also says it has an interface described in a machine processable format, specifically WSDL, which stands for Web Services Description Language. Other systems interact with the web service in a manner prescribed by its description using SOAP messages, typically conveyed using HTTP with an XML serialization in conjunction with other web-related standards. So as you can see, the W3C definition for web services is more inclined to SOAP messages. So this is a very strict definition though. So technically speaking, web services mean to say SOAP web services. But in modern context, there are different other mechanisms to interoperate between machines to machines, right? And so obviously, SOAP is one of that. And previously, there had been something called remote procedure calls, and it evolved into XML RPC and JSON RPC. So these actually predates SOAP, and I would say these technologies like are peers of SOAP technology. And then came representational state transfer, REST. So REST APIs, you probably would have heard of it, is another mechanism to uh, make interoperability possible. And GraphQL is an evolved state of REST invented by Facebook then and now Meta. And gRPC is from Google, and that's another mechanism. It's an enhanced version of RPC with a lot of different uh, uh, productivity and performance improvements and so forth. So we'll look at those things in a different video. And looking at Apache CXF, so it's not a new project. It's been there for ages, like more than a decade and more than 15 or so years. And I don't want to go back to the history on when it was created and so forth, but it actually was its inception uh, was a combination of two projects. It was there was a project called Celtics, which was an open source Java-based ESB project, and there's another project called Xfire, which was a Java-based SOAP framework, and that's how this word CXF came out to be. C from the Celtics and XF from the Xfire combined. It was then called CXF, and then the project was contributed to Apache Software Foundation and so forth. So that's because uh, both Celtics and Xfire had similar roots, and its vision and the mission of the projects were same. It only made sense to combine those two projects. The current version of CXF is at 4.1.0, and it supports developing both SOAP and REST APIs. And other web services frameworks, if you look at that you might come across, and if you search for CXF and what are the other alternatives. In the past, and there have been another project called, even within the Apache Software Foundation, there are multiple projects, and one of those is Apache SOAP. And however, this project, I believe, is dead right now. And then Apache Axis came out to be, and it's again a dead project, in my opinion. And this Axis is what then evolved into Axis 2. Axis 2 is again recently, you don't find a recent release, very recent release, and as I checked last, uh, the latest release of that was back in 2021 or 2022. But still, this is it's a very strong content, a very flexible framework, and it supports the web services standard quite well. And if you look at what are the alternatives for CXF, and Axis 2 would be the strongest contender. Apache CXF, on the other hand, is a very simplistic framework, and if you are looking for simplicity and productivity when it comes to creating SOAP services, REST APIs, and so forth, CXF would be a very good choice. Another framework that you might come across is JBoss Web Services. It's in fact uh, is built on top of CXF, so it might be an interesting thing for you to look at, and if you're especially coming across JBoss background. And there is this other project called Eclipse Metro. It's part of the Glassfish application server, even though there are uh, claims that this project can be used standalone without having to depend on Glassfish application server. I'm not aware of it, and if somebody knows about how to use that thing, and if you have any details, please feel free to comment in this video. And I also don't find a binary distribution of Metro anywhere. But if you do have a place for us to download, explore that, do let me know in the comment as well. So CXF supports variety of standards, and of course it supports SOAP standard for specification, and it supports Java API for XML web services. So this is nothing more than a way to write uh, uh, implement web services using Java, right? And it just gives a specification on how and it makes it easy. Basically, it's in CXF terms, this is called a front end. CXF supports multiple front ends, especially JAX WS is one, and the other front end is something called simple front end. So we'll look at those things in another video. And CXF also supports web services description language, WSDL. It supports transmission optimization mechanism for attachments and things like that. And it also supports various WS standards, web services standards, like the basic profile addressing policy, reliable messaging, and security. And out of this, you might be very much interested in the basic profile and the security standards, which is essential when it comes to developing web services, production grade web services, and so forth. And as I mentioned, Apache CXF also supports REST APIs. In that sense, it supports this specification called JAX RS, so Java API for XML REST services. So we'll look at how to implement SOAP and REST services using CXF in a later video. And now coming to the final part, of course, there are a lot to talk about on this slide, so it will take a little bit longer than I thought to take to finish this video, but it's worth it. So CXF architecture comprises of these components that you see in the slide. So it has a bus, and then it has front ends, it has messaging and interceptors, it has a service model, it has transports, it has protocol bindings, and pluggable data bindings. To understand what is this, let's start off with the bus. So bus is the most important piece in the CXF architecture. So basically this thing I extracted from the CXF documentation over here. If you go to Apache CXF, cxf.apache.org, you'll be able to see these pages, and you can download Apache CXF here. And as I mentioned, the latest version is 4.10. And going back to the home page, and so there are other details like the user's guide, and this is where you will see how to develop web services and web clients, and variety of other functionality that you see in the architecture. So architecture, this diagram I extracted from this website. So if you want to have a quick look at it and also to read through uh, in detail on how this CXF architecture is, and feel free to go through this page and read. And most importantly, so the things that you see on the left pane is uh, what you need to know when you want to go into the details of each section. Okay, so let's first understand what is the bus. So bus, as I mentioned, is the most important thing, and it's the runtime loader of the CXF, and that is the component that will load and manage these other parts. For example, let's say when it comes to a SOAP service, it requires a listener, and so this listener uh, could be given to you by a servlet engine, for example. Once you build your source code, you can wrap your service implementation in a web services archive file and deploy it into a servlet container such as Tomcat or Jetty, for example. And then this bus is what manages all of that interaction with the servlet engine and so forth. And if you want to, strictly speaking, CXF is not dependent on any particular application server or a servlet engine. So you can use any application server or servlet engine that supports these servlet specifications, right? So you can use that. Or else the CXF uh, SOAP or REST services can be run in a standalone mode. And this is one of the front ends will support that mode as well when it comes to uh, running your CXF's based services. And you can also embed certain servlet engines. For example, Jetty, servlet engines can be embedded because it's lightweight. So those techniques are also there. So we look at those kind of things in later videos. So, but see, bus is the place where, like, if you want to make CXF deviate from whatever the defaults that it has, and you will have to write some code or make some configurations that will change the way how bus reacts. And so you get the point, right? So that is the core of it. And so when you want to make changes, you have to make sure that you do it in very sparingly, because that's the core of it. And if you break it, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong, right? But if you want to have that much of control, bus is the place that you will make a lot of changes. Right. So the other thing is the front ends. The front end part. So as I mentioned, it's a way of developing your web services. So Apache CXF supports multiple front ends, and obviously one of those front ends is JAX-WS. As I mentioned, it's a way of implementing your web services, and what JAX-WS gives you is it speeds up the web service development by providing a library of annotations to turn your plain old Java classes into web services and so forth. And so it's a specification. It gives you a bunch of annotations so that you can convert a Java-based, plain old Java-based classes and stuff into web services rather than writing a lot of boilerplate code. And so CXF supports JAX-WS, and it also has something called uh, simple. So simple front end, you can make certain changes, like you don't have to depend on annotations, but if you want to run your service in a standalone mode, you might want to explore the simple front-end mechanism. So next up, looking at messaging and interceptors. The messaging and interceptors, as the name implies, the interceptors are things that you simply uh, you know intercept while the message is coming into the engine and going out of the engine, right? So when it comes to an engine, there are a certain chain of interceptors that you can engage. There are some default interceptors available, and often you might want to add your own interceptors. Let's say as the message comes in and you want to make a logging to an external system, right? Such as for observability purposes and so forth. So you can add an interceptor to the CXF architecture. So you can see how modular the architecture is. And so in uh, in logical sense, these interceptors can be formed into different phases. You can call one phase a security phase, another phase uh, observability phase, another phase as throttling phase, whatever. Like I'm just talking about some custom interceptors phases that you can add, and within those phases you can have as many interceptors as possible, or as you want, right? And then you can uh, combine all of those phases together to call, create an interceptor chain. So, and CXF provides mechanisms for you to create interceptor classes that will have basically there is an interface which you will usually implement, and then you configure the bus through a configuration file or through an API to dynamically add these interceptors. And so this particular functionality gives you more flexibility, and it brings in extensibility into the architecture. And the service model is nothing more than a representation of the web services description language in terms of SOAP message, right? And so that way, you don't really need to know the service model unless you want to do some advanced work. But some of the service factories, such as that you might create one of the service factories here when it comes to now see when it comes to uh, a server factory bean, you create a service class and you provide those things. I don't expect you to understand what I'm talking about right now in terms of the code, but just to explain, as I mentioned, JAX WS front end is there, and also there is a simple front end is there. But in either case, internally CXF uses a factory class, right? A factory bean or server factory bean. There are various different names that you can use. And within those server factory classes, internally CXF uses a service model, which will represent how the web services description looks like, such as when it comes to a web service, you might have, if you are aware of a WSDL format, in that WSDL format, you will have information about different endpoints, information about how you want to, uh, you know, what kind of binding that you want to use in terms of data binding. All of those are explained in the service model. And of course, there are data bindings available. As you can see here, data bindings is the mechanism of how you map a logical message into a particular format in the in terms of how you represent that message uh, in between, let's say, an XML format and Java. So you can use something called JAXB, as I mentioned. That's one of the uh, data binding models, Java architecture for XML binding, and there are other bindings also. For example, JAXB depends on a lot of annotations. However, you can use AGIS or AGIS data binding, which is less dependent on annotation, but there are some annotations as well. And likewise, there are other data binding technologies for XML to Java and so forth. So this is what data binding means. So we see some of these in examples when we look at. And then if you look at protocol bindings, um, CXF supports multiple protocols, right? Now, when I say protocol bindings, it supports SOAP 1.1, it supports SOAP 1.2, it supports POXML, it supports COBA. COBA is a very old technology. However, for historical reasons, these protocols bindings are also supported. So those details you can see it in some of the sections and the transport. So CXF supports multiple transports. Now, when it comes to SOAP, it doesn't have to be strictly HTTP. However, in majority of the cases, you will see HTTP-based SOAP services, but you can also take those SOAP messages over the wire in JMS protocol if needs to be. JMS stands for Java Messaging Service, or this older protocol, transport protocol called COBA. So this is all about how you transport your data binding, like a logical XML or finally whatever that data format over the wire into the other endpoint. So you have HTTP, you have JMS, you have local. Local is basically not going over the wire, but if you want to transfer data within a JVM um, virtual machine, especially on Java, right? So you can use local transport for performance reasons. You can use UDP, and you can also bring in WebSocket server sent events, and also you can bring your own custom transports as well, and Apache Camel transport as well. So Apache Camel is another project within Apache Software Foundation, and some components of Camel is dependent on CXF, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to like make this video and talk a little bit about CXF, because I intend to have another video on Apache Camel, which is a very cool mediation engine, and there'll a lot more to come on that as well. So stay tuned. And that's all I want to talk about in terms of the CXF overview. So I'll see you in another post on how to create a web service, a very simple web service using CXF very soon. And take care. Thank you for watching.